All right, anyway. I don't know what I was saying.
We were talking about the relationship to the test and whether the teacher's relationship, the anxiety that's there, where it's coming from, the placement, that sort of thing.
Right. So some of it, I do think some of it comes from that fear that if things go south for a year as they transition, or let's say they omit something and it's big enough to fit an essay into that topic, or whatever. They naturally worry that they're kind of the front line, that their parents will come to them and say what happened. For my part, I try to say, if something like that happens because we've made a strategic omission for the sake of being able to deliver more quality instruction and a curriculum that goes deeper, then I've got your back. And that puts me in a tough position if that happens, but I can do that because I also have a boss that's willing to back us up there too. And and in the end, I can live with that, right? If we have one off year and we look at that and say, they got a lot of depth and it was a better experience for them, we just didn't happen to hit on this test, I'm fine with that. So, but I think they still feel it no matter what. It probably helps to have me say it. I think I have to say it lots and lots of times, and I do, but they still feel some of that. Some of it is just like, these folks have practiced their whole career in a situation where these tests have been around. They're coming off of an evaluation system that really stressed and still stresses the tests, even though we try to make that not a huge burden for them. So they've internalized it, and a lot of them were students when these tests were. If you grew up in New York State, you took these tests too. They were probably less high stakes, but for a lot of folks, like, their sense of what history or social studies is as a discipline has been, affected by lots of things, including kind of watching these exams and kind of participating in this as a student and as a teacher for a long time. So some of it's in their heads, some of it is external.
You said something interesting there. Their sense of what social studies is. Can you say a little more, like, what is that? Do you think that's changing? Is there something happening there?
In the academy, no, it hasn't changed. It's just, I think maybe it's K-12 catching up to the academy. If you do any amount of graduate work in history or really any social science, you're going to see pretty quickly that most of these questions that people are working on are very much open questions, and you can see it from a lot of different angles. And the right answer stuff is not very interesting, so we mostly wind up working on things that are not well established. I had really the good fortune of, I took a historiography class in college. I have an MA in history. I always felt that that gave me something that some people didn't get. And if your degree is like a bachelor's in education / social studies, and you had 5 social studies courses and they were mostly lower level, you might have sat in a lecture hall. I think you could forgive somebody for walking out of that kind of education thinking that history was closed, right? That it's what happened.
Yeah.
Rather than debates over what happened. So is this idea that history is a debate or that social studies is debatable, that it's open, and these things are not at all new, but if you're, depending on the kind of background that you have, the academic background, this might be a little bit of a shift. I think I don't want to be pessimistic. I do think that most secondary teachers that have specialized in social studies, they're pretty aware of that. Elementary, where they're doing 5 different disciplines, and they might have had one methods class, they may be less aware.
Yeah.
But I think they still forget, right? And if you've been teaching by a textbook and you've been teaching in a pretty teacher-directed way for a long time, and you've been dealing with exams that are right answer exams, you probably start to internalize that after a while. So I do think for some people the nature and purpose of social study, that is shifting in their eyes. It's not
it's not that we've suddenly discovered that history is not a done deal, but some people in the field may be discovering that.
Do you have a sense of that the work that you're doing with your social studies teachers, the training, the support, is that do you think that's common?
Well, what I'm doing with them is very different depending on the grade level.
Sure.
Right. For some good reasons. I don't think it's common. What we're doing with elementary is like right now. What I have running is we had a social studies task force. We had 5 full day sessions over the course of like 2 years, where we explored standards, inquiry, content, all kinds of things. And then based on that, I've designed a series of workshops that we're opening up to all K-5 teachers. That they sign up if they want to, but they're signing up. Like we don't have to force them because they're interested.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, they're filling up. So that's a good thing. And a big part of what I'm trying to do for them in at least the first few workshops is to shift their sense of what social studies is, because they do tend to come at it as a right answer subject. That it's, if you think of social studies being partly about cultural transmission and partly about critical thinking, we have a lot of folks that have been more exposed to the cultural transmission piece. It's about teaching kids what happened, right? And maybe through that making them, feel like they have a part in sort of the common story of America or Western civilization or whatever of the world. But that is, I've watched that aha happen for a lot of elementary teachers that have gone through that. And just by exposing them to different documents where you take an issue that they thought was a done deal, and now all of a sudden it's up for grabs, and what you thought you knew, you're not so sure of anymore. And it doesn't, you do that a couple of times and they start to get it. And so that's been really cool to watch. So part of what I'm doing with them is trying to change their perceptions of what the discipline is. It's partly building background knowledge, and that's like the thing that we tiptoe around. Because, again, if you had one social studies methods course as an elementary teacher, gosh, I mean, I don't know about you, but when I started teaching, even with a master's in history, most of what I had to teach was not stuff I'd ever studied in college. It took years to develop enough background to feel good about it.
Yeah.
And I still learn.
I went from history to econ.
Yeah.
So.
Well, that was my first teaching placement, too. I went from being an Americanist and Latin American history to doing econ, which I hadn't taken since high school.
Yep.
And Global 9, which I hadn't done since high school, same thing. I'd never studied any ancient civ. So anyway, it takes time. So for secondary, it's different. Because they're content specialists, or at least they position themselves as content specialists. And I think there is a lot of variation depending on the kind of preparation they've had and what they've done. Like, we've got people that are in deep and super knowledgeable. Like, right now we've got a guy that's writing his own inquiry on the Salem witch trials. And he spent his summer doing that, and last I checked, he had like 700 documents. I'm not exaggerating. Like, it's insane.
Wow.
He knows so much about this now. But he's in deep because he wants to be. Clearly it's an interest, maybe an obsession, but it's an interest. So we have folks. We do have folks like that, but we also have secondary folks like some of your 6th grade teachers might have an elementary cert that they're teaching as a secondary teacher. But in some ways, the content discussion is harder to deal with, in my experience, with secondary, especially in social studies, because we feel like we know everything.
Social studies teachers?
Right, because, you're in a discipline that's responsible for anything that's ever happened among humans, and a lot of non-human things, too, ever. So it's like a lot. And we can't all know that, but there's like an ego that goes with that. And I do think, as you're asking secondary folks to be able to come up with really good, compelling questions, like, when I've done this, I've had to read deeply on whatever area